This conference will now be recorded.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of Digital Law News. So this is episode 45. So I'm joined today. Sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. So I'm Laura Spencer. I'm an apprentice solicitor at Digital Law UK. I'm joined today with my colleague Peter Wright and also my other colleague Heather Anson. So I'll just pass over to them to introduce themselves, starting with Peter.
Thank you, Laura. I'm Peter, the Managing Director at Digital Law, and we've had a really busy week, and so there's some really big stories to cover as well, and that's why I'm very pleased to be welcoming Heather to join us this week as well to look at the SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States, and a decision that's taken place there. And Heather will also be talking to us about EU VAT rules. So I'll just pass over to Heather to introduce herself, and welcome.
Hi, thank you, and thank you for having me back. I haven't completely alienated myself from you guys. I am a consultant for digital law on areas of international law, but I also have a doctorate in tax law, which is why the two topics really, and I'm from the US, so the two topics are really in my wheelhouse. So I'm happy to help.
Thanks, Heather. So yeah, just a little background. So these are some episodes that we do every week. We just run through a few of the news stories of this week, just some of the talking points that regularly come up in our team meetings. So starting with the first story that Heather is going to be involved on is the new free speech rules for schools in a Snapchat, assessing the Supreme Court decision. So this is the Supreme Court decision that came, I think it was like last week, which ruled that in the social media area, it was established that you can give your finger to your school. So in a court decision, an 8-against-1 decision in Pennsylvania school district, it was violated that the First Amendment was violated by suspending a 14-year-old girl from school from her cheerleading team after the student posted on her Snapchat, F school, F softball, F cheer, F everything, and added a photo of her and her best friend extending their middle fingers.
Right, and of course she didn't say F, she actually used the word that's signified by that.
Of course, yeah.
It's an interesting case, and obviously 8-to-1 shows you that this isn't as divided a court on some issues as you'd think, and it actually shows a remarkable understanding by a court that's generally made up of a lot of older people, but who have a lot of young clerks, that of social media and social media platforms and their reach. So the basis of it is there was a cheerleader who had tried out for the varsity team, and she was not put on the varsity team. She was put on the junior varsity team, which in the US is just about as insulting as it sounds. And so she was upset and took that out on Snapchat with her friends. And if we don't know what Snapchat is, as it is a bit of an older platform these days, but back when this case started, it was all the rage. She probably would have done a TikTok these days. You would send a message picture, things like that, and then the message would disappear after a short while. But the picture was captured and screenshotted by one of the people who she was connected to, and that person's mother happened to be the cheerleading coach, and it was then passed to the school, thus the suspension. Now the idea is that they relied on the fact that this was affecting the school, because even though it was done outside of school, having that sort of if she had said that in school, it would have clearly caused a suspension, would have been a conduct issue. But because it was on Snapchat, there was a question as to whether this could be something that affected the school. So how far outside of the school boundaries can the school go in curbing what is considered free speech normally? And schools do have some authority over this. But the case that really a lot of these hinge on is a case from 1969 and around the Vietnam War. It's a Tinker versus Des Moines Independent Community School District. And that was some students who were wanting to support the ceasefire and for the war to end, and they decided to wear black armbands to school. And the school got wind of it and said, if you wear the armbands to school, you'll be sent home and suspended. And Tinker was one of the students that wore the armband and was sent home. This made it all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said at that time that this was in fact free speech, and that although the school had, as a public school, had an interest, in the U.S. public means a government school, not a privately paid school, but government school, that they have an interest in supporting free speech, but they also have to protect students. So they had to do a balancing act, and they said that if it did not substantially interfere with the ongoing teaching of lessons, things like that, material interference, I believe, was the calling for that. Well, this court took that and then expanded it a bit further for the social media arena, which was the interesting part. So they said there's a three-part analysis. You have to think, one, if we are saying that we're monitoring speech outside of school, are we then becoming in locus parentis is the term? Are we substituting the school as parent outside of the school? If we are looking at social media, which happens off of school grounds all the time, are we then saying that the school looks at the students' speech 24/7? And three, if the public school is looking at speech and doing something to suppress it, should they be doing that, considering that a public school should be a foundational institution for upholding First Amendment rights and other democratic and constitutional rights? So they said if you take all of that into context, you have to be very, very careful about where you're drawing the line in terms of going after this. And the ultimate decision was they did not have sufficient evidence to show that this was materially affecting the school, and that their social media policy in general was not narrowly tailored enough to really address those 3 points that they were talking about. Now, the article we actually linked to, I think you guys linked to this in the notes, but it was from the Law Review, National Law Review, and at the end of it, it has some good guidelines on what schools should think about when putting together a social media policy and response. That was the key reason why I asked for that link to be put in, because I thought that was really good advice. So you don't have to go and read the 42-page summary of the or 42-page opinion from the court.
Pleased to hear it, and thank you for the summary. Just thinking about it there, one interesting issue with this case, I believe, is that they ended up saying that it was taken into account that the pupil was outside of the school grounds at the time. And it was also, I think this was sent outside of school hours as well, which, like you say, this is a case that actually dates from quite a few years ago. Do you see the sort of the ground being muddied a bit, though, if you think of the world that we're in now, where you've got lots of kids who'll have been doing homeschool, and the fact that then people are then sort of doing school work in sort of hours potentially outside of the school day and doing school work at home? So if you've then got similar social media posts that could be contravening the school's rules, then do you think that could have an impact on the principles set out in this decision, or do you see that this is so clear that it should remove any ambiguity that could be created there?
I think that's why those 3 points that they outlined were important in this case. The outside school hours and off school grounds goes into the idea that at what point is there in locum parentum, are we trying to basically parent them outside of school? There is also discussion about, yes, if they are off school grounds, out of hours, doing a school project, if they're doing homework, but those are the types of things you have to take into consideration when you are setting a social media policy and response to social media posts. Was it if she had done those posts whilst on a school field trip with the school other students in the background and officially on a school trip, then it's very likely that this wouldn't have applied because it was a school event and participating in a school thing, and it could very well interfere with the materially interfere with the school school's function. Other students being interfered with, and people not saying, oh, we aren't going to be able to do field trips because we've had this type of behavior on school trips and it interfered with that. So those three things that they added, sort of tweaking that Tinker decision, which was definitely an inside school behavior, helps clarify that more and takes the sort of muddiness out of it. Gives you an analysis, as it were.
Yeah.
Okay, now you ready for me to do confusing talk about tax?
Thank you for that summary, Heather. Yeah, so moving on to our next story then. So this is about the new EU VAT rules, spelling trouble for small e-commerce exports. So thousands of small e-commerce exports or exporters are facing further headaches when it comes to the introduction on 1st of July of the new EU VAT rules that will cost at least £6,900 a year in order to comply with these, according to Commission estimates. So accountants are expecting that many firms will be reconsidering selling in Europe as the cost outweighs the benefit, and rules have been introduced basically to tackle the €7 billion a year in VAT fraud for importers based in non-EU countries, in particular China as well.
Okay. I should point out that that 6,900 whatever is an estimate of what it would cost, and these commissions often they're in support of these types of businesses, so they will often put scary numbers in front of it to make a point. So we shouldn't say, if you're a small retailer that sells, online retailer that sells into Europe, that's definitely how much you're going to pay. But okay, I do have a lot of background in tax, but I should mention I don't currently practice tax law, so all of this is based on my knowledge and background and understanding of taxes and being able to read them quite quickly. An interesting thing to know about VAT, which is technically a sales tax, is that in reality, the person who the person that owes the tax to the state, to the entity, is the person who purchases a product. So if I were buying something online from anywhere, I have a responsibility to pay whatever taxes are owed on that. But obviously that's an unenforceable situation. So how they enforce it is by asking the retailers, this happens all over the world, the retailers to collect the sales tax on behalf of their customers and then file the form saying this is what's happening. So it's essentially a retailers being asked to collect a tax on behalf. So this is what's happening in Europe. They're saying that we want these things to be taxed, but we don't have the mechanism to reach those customers outside of the EU to gather this tax. So we are going to make sure that the retailers do it. Now there's different ways they can do it. They could do it through a treaty with the countries. And there are lots of treaties all over that say, we're not going to collect it we won't charge or collect from people buying from the US or from Australia or whatnot. But if they're going to enforce it through a treaty, there has to be a mechanism in place. And there may be some treaty between the UK and the EU, but they're not the primary target. People in the UK are sort of collateral damage to the overall incentive here. This isn't we're punishing you for Brexit kind of thing. What they're trying to protect against is an influx of very cheap products coming in from China in particular. And I guarantee you there is not a real good solid treaty in place with China saying, yes, we'll make our companies collect tax on behalf of our citizens. So what they're doing is putting an enforcement at the border. So if you don't have a statement on the package that says tax has already been paid by the customer on this item, then it could be either just stopped at the border until it's clarified, or it could be destroyed. So inside Europe, they're telling people, make sure you only buy from companies that make you pay the tax at the till, as they said, which is like when you check out. So that, because if you don't, it is likely it will get stopped at the border and may be destroyed and you'll never get it. So they're warning people inside the EU to make sure they're only buying from reputable. Now in the UK, there are different things that retailers can do, and they can cost different amounts. The straightforward thing to do, but not necessarily the least expensive, would be getting an IOSS, which is a tax certificate in one of the EU countries. A lot of places are picking Ireland because common language, but that may take a while and it may not be as straightforward, and they are charging for it. Currently, Spain and France, I believe, are not charging for IOSS certificates. So if you've got somebody who speaks one of those languages who wants to work with those offices and get an IOSS, they don't have to charge for it, then you're better off. That basically means you're VAT registered in that country, which is an EU country. You don't have to then go through any other ways of getting that. The other way to do it is to sell your goods through an existing marketplace, such as the Amazon marketplace, eBay marketplaces, because those have those mechanisms set up within them to provide the IOSSs. And the post office is very aware that this is an issue, and they don't want to be blamed for things being stopped at the border and being destroyed. So they are requiring, if you're sending something as a retailer to an EU country, that you present them with your IOSS number and have that on the package. And if you don't, they've gotten a partnership with Deloitte and another tax institute that will help you if you want for a fee. You can also just go to your accountant, and they usually are pretty good at setting up mechanisms to make sure this happens. So there are ways around it. If you're a small online retailer that has a little bit of business in the EU, it may be better to either list those things only through a marketplace such as Amazon and let them take a bit of a haircut on it, or just not provide items into the EU. If that's not a big market for you and not a big financial gain for you to do that. If you get a significant amount of money in, then that amount, even if it is $6,900 that you're charged to do this, it may be worth doing to keep that revenue. So that's the balance that you have to take, but that's essentially what's going on here. Any questions?
No, that's really helpful, and thank you for putting in the practical steps there. I think the big takeaway is that it's possible to still do this through one of those marketplaces like Amazon and eBay. So if you are just a comparatively small SME online retailer that's had modest sales into Europe, you don't have to sort of totally pull out of that market. You might just want to change the way that you are selling your products or services in there and take the help that is available through one of the other marketplaces rather than, as I say, totally pull out at all. So thank you very much indeed for making that nice and accessible to our audience today.
Yeah, you'll notice that the commissioner came up with that number of 6,900 something was not very flattering about marketplaces. Well, they'll charge you. Well, yes, they will, but they're trying to promote smaller retail businesses online, so they won't like the idea of pushing people. That's why they say marketplace, and they won't really tell you what they are, because they don't want to really support these big retailers because they believe it takes away from the small retailers. But in this situation, it may be a good way to separate out your EU clients, your EU customers, and your UK. And that's it from me today. So I'll leave you guys to the rest of the show.
Thanks,
Okay.
Heather.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. So moving on to our next story for today then. So this is in regards to Matt Hancock and his use of private email for government business. So Matt Hancock, the former Health Secretary, is now facing an investigation after using a personal email account instead of an official address during the pandemic. So this is in breach of the government guidelines in terms of the email addresses you should be using. So the use of his personal account has concealed a lot of information from both his officials and potentially the public as well. So due to this, the government does not hold any records or much records of Matt Hancock's decisions when it comes to negotiating multi-million-pound PPE contracts, or the setting up of the 37 million pounds test and trace programme, and the overseeing of government's care home strategies as well. So I think me and you discussed this yesterday, Peter, about this being a potential of kind of like escaping the FOO requests.
That's exactly right. It's several folds in which this act is sort of going outside the usual machinery of government. And indeed, the reason appears to be so that Matt Hancock could turn around and go, this is on my own personal private Gmail account, and therefore it is not subject to any FOI request whereby normal government archives and email addresses could be searched. That ignores the fact that if an official or someone else is emailing Hancock from a government email account, that email and any reply that he sends would still be subject to that FOI request. So I don't think it's necessarily quite as effective as it may have appeared at first sight. What is more worrying here is that it seems that Matt Hancock isn't the only government minister or secretary of state who is engaging in this behaviour. We've heard of potentially ministers before using Gmail and their own private email accounts for business activity.
Yeah.
And the reason why this isn't encouraged. The National Cybersecurity Centre, the UK's own arm of the security services, GCHQ, that is tasked with making the UK the safest place upon which to do business online, recommends not using platforms like free Gmail or free WhatsApp or free Dropbox for this very reason, because they are not truly secure and not suitable for business-related activity. And this has significant consequences. I mean, you've highlighted there, Laura, two significant decisions that Matt Hancock, it looks like, exchanged emails regarding on his Gmail account. One is with regards to the awarding of multi-billion-pound contracts for personal protective equipment. So all of those rather valuable gowns, masks, gloves, and other equipment that have been so essential during the course of the pandemic. But also the setting up of the government's £37 billion test and trace programme. Now, we know that the UK government is under surveillance from other governments around the world. Russia, China, Iran, they're all very keen to see what's happening on the government systems. And if Hancock is deliberately going around the GSI, the government secure internet, in order to then discuss this sensitive stuff on Gmail, that means it's at risk. I know that news like this is incredibly frustrating to many of those who actually engage in work with the government, who have to pass through the eye of a needle to get a GSI, a government secure internet email account. And to think that ordinarily you're having to jump through all those hoops just to do this, and yet it turns out that one of these guys at the top is totally ignoring it. It really does beg a belief, really, and it opens up. I mean, the reason I'm so angry about this is that the budget of the Department of Health, in terms of where it's funneling billions of pounds into the NHS, that is one of the biggest expenditures of the British government annually. More than the Ministry of Defence, more than agriculture. The only thing it's secondary to is the Department of Work and Pensions, which expends slightly more. But after the pandemic, who knows? It might be the NHS that's now ahead. And all of that expenditure, all of those key procurement decisions is potentially out there in the ether because this man has been using his own private Gmail account. It is ridiculous, to put it bluntly. And I don't know if the excuse is, I needed to work flexibly when I was out because of the pandemic and I was working from home. It's not good enough. Every organisation this last 18 months has had to cope with these sorts of challenges. And when the government's own advice from the NCSC is don't use these platforms, the fact that he is just suggests a degree of contempt for the rest of us, really. And it's absolutely breathtaking. Matt Hancock resigned at the weekend, and there are various reasons why he had to resign. I think personally that this alone, this use of Gmail should have been enough for him to resign, let alone the rather unsavoury things in his personal life that it also looks like he was carrying out and the breaching of the social distancing guidelines that ultimately did for him. But the whiff of hypocrisy around it never looks good for a government minister.
Yeah, exactly. And I think as well with it, not even being government as well. If it was just a general workplace, for example, if we as professionals, as solicitors or training solicitors, were to use our personal addresses to get in contact with clients or have discussions about work things on our personal accounts, on like our personal WhatsApp or personal Gmail or anything like that, that is a breach in its own rules and maybe even regulatory standards as well. So I think but the fact that it's a government workplace just makes it even worse. But even if it was just a standard workplace, it still wouldn't be good.
Exactly. I think that's an excellent point, Laura, and you've encapsulated the fact that loads of us, be it whether we're solicitors, accountants, financial services, or even the medical profession, there's various sectors where it is made very, very clear what is or is not acceptable. I've heard of people in some sectors who've ended up being disciplined just because of a note that wasn't quite correctly taken, or a record that wasn't kept, or a call that wasn't properly recorded. And in this instance, he's doing all of this on Gmail. Let's not forget that it is only within the last 20 years that we've moved away from paper. Now, the way that government used to operate is that you'd have ministers would have these red boxes with all these papers in, and they would receive papers. And every prime minister from Tony Blair back to John Major, back to Margaret Thatcher, back to Winston Churchill and older, they would then write comments handwritten on reports. There'd be handwritten memos. Yeah. And those would then be kept by the National Archive, and after 30 years, they end up being released to historians. So at the moment, you can very often see the intricate thoughts of previous leaders like Margaret Thatcher and at the moment John Major, because it's coming up against that 20-year rule, and those papers are then disclosed because they've been held by the government system. Now, if you've got ministers using their own private communications, obviously that means that those discussions and those little minutiae in terms of comments in the margin or memos that have been sent, suddenly it's being circumvented. And I know that some people might say, well, so what? It doesn't matter. Well, it does, because when it comes down to it, governing is all about the decisions you make. And you need to be able to see the evidence that goes before them, what decisions are made, how they're made, and when. And if we're going to start unpicking that and not actually keeping that archive, it means that the government becomes less and less accountable, because you cannot then see the basis upon which all of these decisions and actions have been taken. And that's what this goes to the heart of.
Yeah.
And the fact that a senior Secretary of State running one of the largest government departments, who has been in not just, this guy didn't just suddenly fall fully formed into the Department of Health. Previously, this guy ran the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, Digital, Matt Hancock. And before that, I think he was a special advisor in the Treasury. So the fact that he's done all of that and doesn't understand those principles that I've just relayed in terms of governing and accountability, or indeed if he does understand them, has deliberately circumvented them, is really worrying in terms of the rule of law and proper decision making when it comes to the work of government. And you don't have to do all this stuff on paper. It can be done digitally, but if it's going to be circumvented like that, then that leaves massive concerns for us in terms of the effective operation of government ultimately in the UK.
Yeah, exactly. So moving on to our next story then. So this is in regards to Google's new rules for financial adverts and the fact that it won't stop scammers. So campaigners are fearing that Google has left a loophole for scammers to exploit in its new rules for online financial adverts. So tech giants yesterday announced that it was clamping down on financial fraud by tightening up the way it verifies the identity of advertisements who are targeting people in the UK. So firms seeking to place promotions for financial products on its platform will have to demonstrate that they are authorised by the Financial Conduct Authority, a move which was described by Google as a significant additional measure to protect its users.
Yes, thanks, Laura. This is an interesting step. So the UK Financial Conduct Authority is trying to, it's supposed to authorise organisations that are offering financial services for sale in the UK. And Google is trying to underpin the adverts that it runs on its platforms by saying that it will refer to the regulatory information that these organizations have. The loophole, as it were, is that the FCA's list of those who are authorized is publicly available. Yeah. So an advert could just copy and paste someone else's authorization details and say, oh, and actually this is us and this is our product. And by the time anyone realizes that it is actually a scam or a Ponzi scheme or a basic full-on fraud, monies may still have been transferred and it wouldn't make any difference. A lot of this is a tricky one in that, Google are trying to sort of show that they're being responsible here, and they thought, well, surely this is a good step to take. But it's been pointed out that there was one organization, a financial services organization, that collapsed. That turned out it was pretty much a fraud. Was LCF. 200 billion was defrauded from potential investors. Sorry, 200 million, not 200 billion. Still thinking about the billions from the Department of Health. But the point is that even if you had this system of regulation in place then, those who are running LCF could have got around it, and those losses would still have been sustained. So, is this a move in the right direction? Yes. Is more effective regulation probably needed? Sadly, yes, is the case. So it remains, I think, very dangerous in terms of seeing adverts online for potentially massive returns from different schemes. Some of them are in the realm of fintech, financial technology. Some of them are in the realms of cryptocurrency. And because sometimes there are, genuine cryptocurrencies can be so difficult to understand anyway, that I think that there's a lot of people out there who are vulnerable in terms of the fact that they don't understand the technology, and they're therefore ripe for exploitation by fraudsters. And this is what Google's trying to prevent by taking this step. But arguably more steps are going to have to be taken until you're properly reducing the risk for consumers. But regrettably, there's probably always going to be a certain amount of risk out there. But at the moment, the risk of being defrauded is pretty high, and that's what they're trying to reduce.
Yeah, exactly like you said with the loophole. I think this whole system is the fact that you've got to prove that you're FCA regulated before you can put your advertisement up. But if it is just the fact of entering a registration number or maybe a certificate or something like that, if people are then, all that information is freely online, surely that a company could copy that information, put the advert up, somebody sees that it's regulated by FCA and trusts it even more than they would have previously. And then maybe people may make the situation worse before it even gets better in some ways.
Precisely. There's a lot of professions and industries out there where sometimes you're looking for a quality mark that suggests, oh, if I'm going to go along and use a tradesman to come along and fit a boiler in my house, I want to make sure they're Corgi registered. No one really knows what Corgi registered means, but it's still nonetheless the quality mark you look for. But there's nothing to stop the unscrupulous person going, oh yes, I'm a Corgi registered boiler fitter, use me. And if you're just looking at the advert and it says that, you take that at face value. But how many people then stop and actually look up the list and check that they are Corgi registered? Yeah. And a similar thing for a range, anything from the Association of British Travel Agents regulating travel. So the idea is that if you go and buy a holiday, you get your money back if it goes wrong. In the same way, a travel agent could say, oh, yes, you're a member of ABTA, when they're not. So there's always that. I think it's also almost the education for the consumer to say, don't necessarily take what is in an advert at face value. So if you see it says regulated by the FCA and here's the number, go and check on the FCA's website and check it is a genuine listing before transferring even a penny of your hard-earned money, is the point.
Yeah, exactly. So kind of sticking on the same thing then. So the next two stories and as last two stories of today are kind of about cryptocurrency. So I'm just going to cover these in one and then we'll have a discussion about it after. So the first one is in regards to Binance and the trading ban, which is doing little to stop the rise of cryptocurrency in the industry. So this may be one of the biggest moves yet by the Britain's financial regulator against the cryptocurrency industry. But it's saying that there didn't even make a ripple in the sales of cryptocurrencies. So the FCA have ordered Binance Markets Limited to cease regulatory activity in the UK and to post a notice prominently onto Binance.com, alerting the customers of the ban. But since this, it's not stopped any Britons actually trading digital currencies if they wish to still with the group. And the other story is in regards to TPICAP and their plans to launch a cryptocurrency trading site. So the world's biggest interdealer broker is launching a cryptocurrency trading platform with Fidelity, I don't know how to say that word, investments and Standard Chartered digital assets custody unit as well. So the platform is aimed at financial institutions, investors, banks and hedge funds, and they're currently waiting approval from the FCA and expect to be operational by the end of the year.
Thanks, Laura. I think both of these stories tie into the moves that the Financial Conduct Authority is taking to try and actively manage the developing market around cryptocurrency, while trying to sort of maintain the UK's reputation for comparatively light touch when it comes to financial services regulation. Why is this important? Well, you know, the London market, one of the biggest in the world, is now outside of the European Union and outside of regulation by the European Union, and therefore what the FCA is trying to do is therefore crucial in terms of the future viability of London and the UK as a financial services market. And financial services, like it or not, remains one of the biggest engines of the UK's economy. So it kind of needs the wheels to continue to turn to make the transactions work and to keep fueling the economic engine as a whole. Now, so therefore, when the FCA turns around and says we're actually going to order Binance to cease all of their regulated activity in the UK and post a notice alerting on the Binance.com website, alerting consumers to that ban. This is a significant measure. In fact, we're probably talking about a more significant bit of practical enforcement by the FCA to really try and show that it is actively policing and looking at activities when it comes to cryptocurrency. And yet, as you correctly said, Laura, still the Binance coin token ended up increasing in value. Bitcoin increased in value. So even though the FCA has taken this activity, no one at the moment is paying a blind bit of attention. Let's not forget as well that we talked, I think, either last week or a few weeks ago, about the moves by the Financial Conduct Authority to try and register cryptocurrencies. Yeah. So any cryptocurrency that's operating a wallet and is trading in the UK, they're supposed to be registered with the FCA. I think at the moment, when we last looked at the list, there was was it 5 or 6 cryptocurrencies on there?
Yeah, there's 5 actually registered, and I think there's some on the pending list because I think it's a new thing, and a lot of companies are applying for this registration and then getting struck down because they're not meeting the standards in terms of anti-money laundering and things like that. So they're having to go back and going on the pre-registration list whilst they're still developing the product.
And that's about, I think there's about 70 odd companies with cryptocurrencies on that list, on that pending list, trying to move across. So clearly we can see the FCA is trying to be more proactive with its regulation of this sector. It certainly seems to be. I mean, we've talked in the past, it's been perceived that some financial services investment can seem a bit like sort of the roulette wheel rather than traditional banking. And in comparison to that, this seems even more like the cryptocurrencies, but even more like the world of Las Vegas compared to what you'd imagine when it's traditional banking. You've got potentially massive rewards, massive amounts of money that can be made when you've got such large levels of growth. So Bitcoin going up yesterday during the week 7%, and at one point was trading at $34,000 per Bitcoin. You know, if you brought that or even had that at a comparatively low price 10 years ago, your congratulations, you're now a Bitcoin millionaire, almost billionaire even. But you know, at the same time, you can make a great amount. You can also lose a lot because at one point Bitcoin lost all of its gains that it's made throughout 2021 in June. So it is very volatile. And it's interesting that we've then got ICAP here talking about having a digital asset platform to allow for cryptocurrency trading. One of the big changes in financial services over the last decade has been the fact that rather than having to call a broker who would buy and sell shares and stocks for you, you can now do it all yourself through increasingly sophisticated online platforms that allow you to monitor patterns, see what's going on. And you've got the same access to the traders in the city anyway. This is trying to do the same thing when it comes to cryptocurrency, making it more straightforward to have this sort of platform. It will be aimed at those institutional investors, the banks and the hedge funds, so they could in turn put their stocks into cryptocurrency. Yeah. When we're talking about institutional investors and hedge funds, we're talking about hundreds of millions of pounds, if not billions. So then if they were to start plugging that into cryptocurrency, guess what? The value of that cryptocurrency would in turn inflate again, and that's exactly the nature of this. Are we looking at something that's volatile? Are we even looking at a bubble, almost like the dot-com boom of the late 1990s, which I'm sure half of our listeners can't even remember, but there you go. So there's certainly a lot happening in the world of cryptocurrency. The FCA has to authorize that platform before it ends up becoming operational. You know, the FCA tries to be comparatively light touch, so more than likely it would authorize it. It might put some conditions on that authorization, but let's see. They're trying to clamp down, so it could be that they end up attaching more strings to that authorization or withholding authorization pending certain conditions being carried out. So the amount of regulation on the operation of cryptocurrency in the UK is increasing, and this is something I think that consumers who are investing in cryptocurrency need to be mindful of, and also the organisations that are embarking on issuing cryptocurrencies also need to consider very carefully as well. So a lot to consider. It's all very fast moving, like cryptocurrency itself, and it's going to be interesting how the FCA reacts to the growing challenge that is posed by cryptocurrency in the coming months.
Yeah, I think you did a good summary there. So that's it for our stories today. So just want to give a little reminder about our GDPR toolkit for legal practices that we've got on special offer still. So this is down to £99 from £195, if I'm correct. And this involves checklists, a lot of information about how you as a legal practice can become compliant with Data Protection Act and GDPR as a whole. So I'll just pass over to you, Peter, just to give a little bit more information about that.
Thank you very much, Laura. Yes, so this is indeed, as you quite rightly say, that our guide that contains forms and templates and checklists to help law firms comply with their requirements under GDPR. We've also had some of our clients in accounting, education and financial services who've also purchased copies who've said this is really helpful. It helps us to understand how we can approach our compliance. And of course, we have the hard copy and the electronic versions as well. So you can generate and populate your own checklists and forms and be on your way to demonstrating compliance in a way that works with the regulator, the ICO, and also, for example, works in demonstrating compliance for other regulators. So be it the SRA, the ICAW, whoever it is, you know, they want to see a paper trail, more than likely online now, just to see that you're meeting the requirements that they ask for when it comes to storing people's personal data. And this guide shows you how.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. And we just want to say a big thank you to Heather and the managing director of Anson Evaluate, obviously, to join us today and for helping us produce this webinar as well, and this podcast. Just for those who don't know, Anson Evaluate do help people like companies like Digital Law to produce webinars, training events and other things as well. So if you are interested in any of those services, you can go over to their website, which is ansonevaluate.com, and see what services they have on offer, and their contact details are on there as well.
Indeed, and if you are looking for a webinar or podcast, great place to go to. And also there'll be, we're working with Anson Evaluate at the moment on our own series of continuing professional development training webinars this year, so keep an eye there for our upcoming schedule of data protection, cybersecurity and social media law webinars.
Great, thank you, Peter. So that's everything we've got time for today. So we just want a quick reminder that these podcasts and webinars are available through our website, our YouTube channel, and on any podcast channels as well. They're usually published on a Thursday or a Friday every week, so please do watch out for them. And thank you for listening, and we hope to see you again next week.